You ever have one of those neighbors who acts like they own the whole street? Yeah, that's Karen. The kind of woman who wears her sunglasses even in the shade, walks around with a clipboard, and thinks every rule in the HOA handbook was written personally for her. It all started one summer morning when Karen came storming across the yard like she was leading a parade. I was helping Grandpa fix the old wooden fence, the same one he built with his bare hands 30 years ago. The paint was faded, sure, but it stood tall and proud, just like him. Karen stopped right at the property line, crossed her arms, and said in that voice, that high-pitched, sugar-coated tone, "This fence violates the height restriction. It's way too tall!" Grandpa didn't even look up from his hammer. "Too tall?" he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Ma'am, it's been this height since before you moved here." Karen pulled out a printed sheet like it was a court summons. HOA Section 14, Paragraph C. Fences must not exceed 4 feet. Yours is 5.5. Grandpa chuckled. Then I guess it stood too tall for 30 years without anyone noticing. But Karen wasn't laughing. She snapped a photo, muttered something about fines and citations, and marched back toward her house, her little HOA kingdom. That night, Grandpa sat on the porch, sipping his sweet tea, quiet as ever. I could tell he was thinking. When Grandpa gets quiet, it's never good news for people like Karen. The next morning, the rumble of a post-hole digger woke the neighborhood. Grandpa had marked out a long line right along the fence, but not to lower it. Nope. He was planning something bigger. Karen came out in her bathrobe, yelling across the yard. "What are you doing now?" Grandpa just grinned. "You said the fence was too tall, so I'm replacing it with a wall." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't build a wall! That's against code!" Grandpa didn't even pause. "Then you better start printing new pages for that HOA handbook, Karen." And just like that, the neighborhood war officially began. Because when you challenge Grandpa, you don't get a compromise. You get a statement. By sunrise, Grandpa was already in his workshop. A cup of black coffee in one hand and his old notebook in the other. That notebook was his secret weapon, filled with hand-drawn sketches, ideas and plans for every project he'd ever built. This time the plan on the page was bold, wild, and absolutely legal. See, Grandpa wasn't just a stubborn old man. He was a retired engineer, the kind who knew exactly how to bend the rules without breaking them. When I peeked over his shoulder, I saw the title written across the top of the blueprint. Project Freedom Wall. He had every detail mapped out. Height, width, foundation depth, and even drainage, so the HOA couldn't claim it caused flooding issues. But here's the genius part. The wall wasn't technically a fence, according to city zoning. If a structure was decorative and not solely for division, it wasn't bound by the HOA's fence regulations. Grandpa smirked when I pointed it out. "See that, boy? You don't beat rules by breaking them. You beat them by knowing them better than the people who wrote them." That afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up with pallets of bricks, bags of cement, and steel rebar. Karen was outside gardening, pretending not to watch, but I saw her eyes narrow like a hawk spotting prey. She finally stomped over, voice sharp and cutting. "What exactly are you building?" Grandpa smiled, tapping the blueprint pinned to the side of the shed. "A retaining wall? Decorative, functional, and perfectly within regulation." Karen's lips tightened. "I'll be contacting the HOA about this." "Already did," Grandpa said, holding up a stamped permit. "They said as long as it's decorative, we're good." The look on Karen's face was priceless. A mix of confusion, fury, and disbelief. She turned red, muttered something about illegal construction, and stormed off toward her house. That evening, word spread fast. Neighbors came by, curious. Some offered to help. Others just wanted front row seats to the feud. One old-timer even said, "This is better than TV." Brick by brick, Grandpa laid the foundation. He worked with the patience of a craftsman, the precision of an engineer, and the attitude of a man on a mission. And every time Karen peeked from her blinds, Grandpa gave her a little wave, the kind of wave that said, "You started this." He wasn't just building a wall, he was building a message. By the third day, the wall was rising fast, strong, solid, and unapologetically tall. The bricks were a warm red that caught the sunlight just right, almost glowing at sunset. To anyone else, it looked like a piece of art, but to Karen, it was a personal insult, a monument to defiance. Standing right next to her manicured lawn, you could practically feel the storm brewing. That morning, as Grandpa spread mortar, we saw Karen on her front porch, phone in hand, pacing like a general before battle. She wasn't going down quietly. By noon, 2 HOA board members arrived in their little golf cart, clipboards ready, badges pinned like they were deputies in some suburban Wild West. Karen led the charge. "This wall violates our neighborhood aesthetics," she shouted. Grandpa calmly wiped his hands and leaned on his shovel. "Aesthetics, huh? Funny, I thought you folks liked brick." Your mailbox is made of the same stuff. One of the HOA men cleared his throat, trying to sound official. Sir, according to HOA policy, According to the city permit, Grandpa interrupted. This wall is decorative, not a fence. And I've got the paperwork right here. He handed them the permit with a grin. Karen's eyes darted across the paper like she was searching for a loophole. Any loophole? But there wasn't one. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You think you're clever, don't you? Well, you haven't heard the last of me. Grandpa chuckled. Oh, I'm counting on that. That night, Karen went nuclear. She started posting photos of the wall on the neighborhood app, calling it an eyesore, a safety, hazard, even a threat to property. Values. The comment section exploded. Half the neighborhood defended Grandpa. The other half brought popcorn. One neighbor even joked, finally, something interesting around here besides bake sales. But the next morning, things escalated. Karen had called in a city inspector. A white truck pulled up, lights flashing, clipboard ready. The man inspected every inch, measured the height, checked the plans, and finally looked at Grandpa. Sir, this structure is perfectly compliant. Karen's jaw dropped so hard I thought it might hit the driveway. The inspector tipped his hat and left. Grandpa just smiled, mixing another batch of mortar. You can't fight common sense with complaints, ma'am, he said quietly. Karen stormed inside, slamming her door so hard the window shook. But none of us knew. She was already planning something much bigger. The wall was nearly complete, 10 feet high at its tallest point, topped with smooth stone caps and a hand-carved sign that read, Respect boundaries. Grandpa's masterpiece stood proudly, a silent message that echoed louder than any HOA rulebook ever could. But peace? Yeah, that didn't last long. A week later, the mailman handed Grandpa an envelope. Thick, official, and stamped with the HOA's emblem. Inside was a notice of violation, demanding immediate removal of the wall or a daily fine of $500. Karen had found her loophole. She'd convinced the HOA to redefine decorative structures as temporary installations. Basically, they rewrote the rulebook overnight, just to tear Grandpa's wall down. Grandpa read the letter once, then calmly folded it and placed it on the porch table. They want to play hardball, huh? He said softly. That evening, he called a few of the neighbors who had supported him since day one, the folks tired of Karen's endless complaints and petty fines. Within hours, a plan was in motion. By morning, signs began appearing on lawns across the neighborhood. We stand with Grandpa. Even the local paper picked up the story. Retired engineer battles. HO over wall dispute. Karen lost it. She stood on her driveway, shouting at the news crew, waving her clipboard like a sword. He's violating community harmony. This wall divides us. One reporter turned to Grandpa. Sir, why not just take it down and keep the peace? Grandpa smiled at the camera, eyes full of that quiet fire. Ma'am, peace isn't when everyone agrees. It's when everyone's respected. She didn't like my fence, so I built something stronger. That line went viral. Within 2 days, the HOA inbox was flooded with emails from people all over town, siding with Grandpa. The pressure grew so intense, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. And you know who didn't show up? Karen. Word spread that she'd received her own violation notice. Apparently, her decorative backyard pergola hadn't been approved either. Karma moves fast in small towns. By the end of the month, the HOA backed off completely. The fines were dropped. The wall stayed. And the best part? Grandpa turned the area along the wall into a flower garden, open to everyone, even Karen. One afternoon, I saw her standing there quietly, looking at the roses blooming along the bricks. She didn't say a word, just nodded and walked away. Grandpa watched her go and smiled. Funny thing about walls, he said. They don't just keep people out. Sometimes they teach them where to stand. If you loved Grandpa's epic move against Karen, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you'd do, and don't forget to subscribe for more crazy HOA showdown stories.